There have been empty shelves in supermarkets today, loo roll and dried foods harder to find in some places.
Even in the driving rain, Venezuelans started their day in search of food. Not today. The only stores with affordable food are shut.
To put it bluntly, folks, you are living through the worst food crisis this world has ever seen with 8 billion people. It is time to wake up.
Food insecurity, because it's affecting both the supply and the demand. The food value chain needs to be kept alive to be able to have food available.
The immediate impact of not having workers is also a real threat. In Europe, they've been calling for, an army of a land army to come out and basically help grow the fields. You don't have seasonal workers. I know in the U.S., we recently lifted bans on seasonal workers from Mexico to help with agricultural production. Again, these are temporary solutions, and they're probably not going to make that big of a difference. China's had bans lifted. They've done all sorts of things to try and get people back out into the fields, and it really hasn't worked. They've even put propaganda out there saying, oh, we're doing fine. But then the truth is, the reality is that they're not getting people in the fields to work. They're not getting labor out there to work. You can't get a labor force to be willing to go out and work if they're getting compensated to stay at home. And the reality is that's part of what we're facing right now. We've got, stimulus packages coming out. People that don't have jobs, what's going to convince them to go out and take seasonal jobs working in a field if they're getting a government stimulus check? And I'm not saying that we don't need those government stimulus checks, but we have to start looking at those types of payments as a temporary basis to get us by the shortfalls that we've come into. We can't look at those as a way of sustainability, but that's how the society is going to look at it. You're going to have more and more people staying at home. I've heard from a lot of folks that they're frustrated because they're in an essential business and they need to keep working. In our house, we've gotten things from the agricultural department, papers to keep in our cars that allow us to continue to operate. And a lot of these people working for these essential businesses, they want a break like everybody else. And that's the way society begins to think in a situation like this. When these things first come up and people aren't taking it that seriously, when they're not taking their survival that seriously, and they see a bunch of people getting a vacation, a paid vacation, they want that paid vacation too. Well, seasonal workers are not going to go back to work if they're getting paid to stay home. That's not how this works. Even if, no matter what you do to encourage them, yes, the farm owners who own the farms, they're going to work. They're going to do everything that they can, but they're not going to have the ability to recruit the seasonal workers, the seasonal task force that they normally have in years past, because people are getting paid to stay at home. This is the problem with the American welfare system. And I'm not saying that the stimulus package is an American welfare system per se. I think that it is needed. I know in our situation, we lost a significant amount of money within a week when Donald Trump declared a national emergency. A lot of our income from other sources diminished immediately. We are contractors. We don't get paid if we don't do the work, and if the jobs get canceled, we get canceled. So stimulus checks definitely help out in that situation. They help to backfill a situation. But if we don't get people to get out there and get to work out in the fields, we've got a bigger problem. And that's not going to happen as long as they think that there's more stimulus packages on the way. As long as they think stimulus package 2, 3, and 4 are going to be passed by Pelosi, they're not going to go out and work in the fields. We're going to have a major food crisis just from that.
It is a global problem calling for a global response.
Food security is something that's been weighing on the minds of everybody globally this year. And it's something that I've been talking about for the past year and a half. And I know that a lot of other channels like Ice Age Farmer and Adapt 2030 and Oppenheimer Ranch Project, all of these channels have been talking about the food security situation that we're running into, not because of some pandemic that was coming up, but because of the pure logic of science and what is happening globally that's going to change our global food supply.
Well, it's an annual problem. Every year between harvests, as stocks from the previous harvest run down, people get hungrier. So we are now at the peak of the lean season, but the numbers are unprecedented.
I did a video earlier this year talking about the Club of Rome and the per capita issue that we're running into. And that is just simply a matter of mathematics that some guys back in the 70s came up with, that said by the year 2020 we're going to start, running out of food, having health crises, all types of things. I'm not a believer in the Club of Rome or the per capita calculations they came up with per se. I do think that our population is getting to a size where it is becoming harder to maintain, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't be maintained. But I think studies like that have been extremely dangerous for society. They've provoked things like Agenda 21 that are highly, in my opinion, inhumane and in an incorrect way of thinking. Sustainability is another word that we've heard pop up over the years. It's something that people have pushed to popularity, and I think that's another way of trying to get people to get out there and be more self-sufficient. But self-sufficiency is probably the word that I would use more than any of those other words to describe my thought process behind the food security issue and how to solve it. And I'm going to be doing some videos showing you guys what we have done. When we moved out here with horses. We wanted to start a bison ranch, and that's how we started building out our infrastructure. We started with the house. We've been growing since then, but what has happened over the past year and a half or so is the top 6 acres around our house, which we were mainly reserving for recreational purposes, has turned into basically a homestead. We have chickens up here, we have gardens, we have fruit trees growing. We're probably going to have our first apples this year, which is pretty exciting. And all of these things are steps that we have taken as we've become more aware of the simple science and math that shows us that we're heading into a period of time where food is going to be more scarce. And that is probably one of the worst social security issues globally that we can run into, is a shortage on food supply. So let me get into what's really happening here. And a lot of this stuff, we've been talking about for quite some time. Last January, I posted a video talking about 2019 being a rough growing season and probably the last close to normal growing season. Although we're not starting out this spring as cold and wet as we were last spring, we still haven't hit the springtime yet. We're still seeing storms hit across the Midwest. It's probably going to be a very wet spring this year. What I'm more concerned with than the spring this year is the fall. We saw a strong Arctic oscillation almost throughout the winter time. That built up the Arctic sea ice levels to what they consider normal levels. And what we've seen in the history is that any time that we have a winter of strong Arctic oscillation, the following winter are substantially colder because you have more Arctic sea ice buildup from the winter before. And we could also expect temperatures throughout the summertime to range a little more on the cooler side for most of the summer than the warmer side, which introduces things like funguses and things to crops that are hard to combat for farmers. So this year is going to be a much different year. There's not just going to be that one late planting complication, but there's going to be multiple complications that I think we're going to run into. I think we will have some late plantings this year, and I know that insurance has changed over the past year to help accommodate for some of that. But then we're going to be running into a summertime where funguses are going to be more vibrant. And the other thing that you have to remember with microorganisms like funguses and viruses and things like that is that during periods of minimum solar activity, like what we're in now, cosmic rays allow the mutation of these smaller organisms to happen faster, and they are able to adapt to their environment faster. We saw the African swine fever last year. We're seeing the current pandemic this year. And that pandemic, whether it was man-made, created or not, the fact is that the multiple strains that have come off of that have easily developed because they're in an environment that allows them to mutate much faster. And this is pure science. I've posted many articles on this in the past, peer-reviewed scientific research papers that show that this is the case. And then when you combine that with possibly slightly cooler, wetter temperatures through the summertime, you're looking at a strong potential for fungal growth on crops, and that's going to be the next battle. The third battle is going to be in early winter. And so now we're looking at basically having here in the US, and when I'm looking at crops, I'm looking mainly at the US, we're looking at 3 battles to face this year, and I think they're going to be significant ones. Now, the other issue that we've seen developing in Europe is a rodent population issue. I did a video on this as well. Rodents seem to be more vibrant this year, and again, when you look at fertility rates and the rate of survival of offspring, it tends to be higher during minimal solar activity for the opposite reasons. The fertility in infants do better with less solar radiation. So that is going to impact the amount of the rodent population that we see. Rabbits, mice, moles. I almost never see moles, but I see them now running around on the top of the ground, which means that there's a lot of moles in the ground. We have seen a ton of mice this year, and the other day my wife was commenting about how many rabbits there were out in our yard and how we needed to do better protection around our gardens. So the rodents are definitely something that are going to impact, again, food supplies and crops, especially if they're not handled early on. We do have a lot of ways of handling them. When they develop in areas that are less noticeable to mankind, their population can get out of control extremely quickly. So we've seen this problem in Germany. The damage to croplands and grasslands has been visible from space and out in Europe, just out in Europe in general. I know that Ireland has a rat infestation warning out. And then here in the US, we've had a lot of rat infestations, especially in New York, LA. Even the Queen had to leave the palace this past year because of the rat infestation, and the White House had a vermin infestation. So this isn't, this is kind of old news that's been trickling in over the past year, but there's definitely a population increase, and what we need to watch is that population increase happening out in the fields, because that's where it's going to affect crops. Moles can destroy crops, mice can destroy crops, rabbits can destroy crops, and so we've got to keep an eye on the rodent family population. They're another species, but again, during times like this, they tend to thrive a lot more.
They are known for breeding quickly and their capability to eat their own body weight in food every day.
And we can't forget about the locusts.
Hundreds of billions of desert locusts are set to start wreaking havoc on the farms in the Horn of Africa, Asia, and the Middle East.
The locusts have been swarming all over Africa and moving into Asia. I mean, these countries are facing major food shortages just from the locusts, and this doesn't even, this was occurring since 2018. That's when these locust swarms started forming.
The current swarms first originated in the Arabian Peninsula, but unusual heavy rains created good breeding grounds and allowed the locusts to multiply for months without agriculture experts detecting them. They then invaded Yemen, Somalia, and Ethiopia. From there, they spread into other parts of the world.
And they've gotten to the size where they are now, and it doesn't seem like anything we're doing is stopping them. These locusts are taking away food from millions of people that can't import it right now. You have one of the largest food crises in the world being caused by a combination of the locusts and a disruption in the food supply chains.
What's more, in just a single day, these hungry insects can eat the same amount of food that 35,000 human beings would be capable of.
Agricultural producers across the U.S. this year are having a significant problem getting chemicals, and these would be pesticides, herbicides, all the things that farmers need to be able to grow crops in the abundance that they grow them. And I know every organic farmer is going to be commenting on this video, but the fact is it's true. But one of those chemicals, or one of those materials that farmers need the most abundance of to create the most abundant food is in short supply, and it's in short supply for numerous reasons, and that is phosphate. Now, because of the late plantings last year and less plantings, and this comes into more of a finite resource situation, but we've heard a lot about fertilizer lately, and fertilizer is something that is a big challenge this year. It's a bigger challenge than I think the news has made it up to be. A lot of the challenge that you've read about has been that, transporting the fertilizer because of the pandemic. They can't get fertilizer from place to place, but there's a bigger story that's underlying this, and this is that we had a fertilizer shortage before any of this started. Phosphate is a finite resource. It is something that we mine out of the earth to make fertilizer. If we don't have fertilizer, we lose 50% of the world's agricultural production or more. That's a significant amount. Fertilizer is the only reason why we have been able to feed a population of 8 billion people. Now, a couple things have happened in the phosphate industry over the past year that changes things dramatically, but it's important to remember that the phosphate shortage problem is something that's been ongoing for a very long time. It's something we saw back in the 70s, and it's something that we're starting to feel the real effects of today. The CIA has done reports on this. I mean, this is a big deal. Phosphate is a substantially big deal, and it's going to impact crops this year. Part of that impact this year's, yes, the supply chains are disrupted. It's hard to get phosphate from place to place. China's been hoarding phosphate. China is one of the larger producers of phosphate. And then here in the US, we have a different type of problem. Phosphate, as it becomes more scarce, becomes harder to extract, harder to mine. And that is with any mining material, oil, gas, anything that we take from the ground. As our rich resources deplenish and we have to dig a little deeper to find it, it becomes more expensive to extract. So last year when we had a lot of late plantings and we didn't have nearly the amount of acreage planted, something happened in the phosphate industry. It became too expensive to keep mining operations open, so they shut them down. They shut them down, and that actually inhibited not the fertilizer market for last year, but the fertilizer market for this year. There's just simply not enough phosphate. The phosphate industry shut down last year, and it's going to be hard to reopen because we keep pushing crop prices so low to try and avert the food crisis that farmers can't afford to pay a higher price for fertilizer and phosphate. But the truth is it has to go higher if we're going to have it. So they're going to have to extract it somehow if we're going to have it. And because it is a finite resource, and because we are to the point where it's expensive to mine, and that should tell you that we're on the downward trend of the availability of fertilizer. You hear a lot about organic farming, you hear a lot about these things, but the truth is those staple grains that we have, the only way we've been able to grow the abundance of them that we have grown, if you read the reports, the farmers winning the awards for the highest yields, a lot of it has to do with fertilizer. Without the fertilizer, you're not going to be able to grow as much. This is because we have a topsoil problem around the world. Our topsoil has eroded away. When we removed large herds of ruminants, we removed our natural topsoil because they help create that topsoil. And when you look at topsoil, it's basically like an aquatic environment. It's full of a lot of things. That's one of the reasons why we have cows out on our property. We don't have a large herd of cows. We just have 4 cows and 3 horses. But the cows help keep up and maintain our grasslands. And because of that, we have a very rich source of hay, which is one of the crops that we produce. We have an abundance of hay. If you look at some of the fields around us, they don't produce nearly as much grass tonnage per acre as we do. And a lot of that has to do with land management. We don't use any fertilizers, anything like that. But the truth is that we have to have those ruminants. We have to have those grazers to be able to maintain our topsoil levels at a desirable growth rate for the grass. And if we don't maintain it, then what will happen is the grass will become overgrown, number one. The ground won't get aerated. We won't get the microorganisms in the soil that we need to have to create healthy soil. The soil will eventually dry out, erode away. The grass will become weak to the woody weeds. The woody weeds will take over, and we have a mess on our hands. And so that is why You know, when we talk about regenerative agriculture is so important. It actually maintains property, maintains land, and as we know, grasslands are, you know, for those of you who are concerned about CO2, grasslands sequester more CO2 than a forest does. A forest just stores it, and it stores it above ground. Grass roots actually bring the carbon back into the soil. I'm not concerned about CO2 because I don't think that CO2 is having that much of an impact on our planet. It's a logarithmic thing. Its impact is already done with. And to be honest with you, if we had a warmer greenhouse effect, it would make life a lot easier for everybody. We'd be able to grow a lot more. Anyway, back to fertilizer. We've had a fertilizer shortage. We've had a shortage just with mining. It's harder to extract. Now we've got production cutbacks last year, massive production cutbacks, which affects this year's supply of fertilizer. If you don't order your fertilizer now for spring planting, you may not have fertilizer this year. Not to mention the supply chain disruptions that we're seeing globally is making it harder for countries to trade fertilizer across borders. So fertilizer is going to be a major factor in this year's crops. You can't expect the same yields that you've seen over the past couple years if you don't have the fertilizer. The other thing that we've been hearing a lot about are seed shortages. Well, what happened to all the seeds? Why don't we have seeds? Well, if you look at last year's crops, we didn't have a great year of crops. The numbers have been artificially inflated for over the past year that I've been watching. There's no way that the numbers have been what they have been.
We had a very wet spring and
too much rain to
plant.
Justin Jordan is among the millions of American farmers living on an emotional roller coaster that only seems to go down.
So this corn is almost 2 feet shorter than it normally is.
Thanks to a bizarro spring, he's looking at a 30% drop in yield.
It's a kind of feeling of helplessness and stress is what it kind of feels like.
Yeah.
So, but you just do what you can with what you have to work with.
At least he has a crop. Too many farmers lost everything to epic floods, and even the lucky ones are losing sleep over fear of an early frost.
Now, the flip side of this is that population has continued to grow, and of course we've been trying to keep all those ethanol producers in business, so we've been shipping a lot of corn to ethanol producers, but something happened in the corn trade last fall that tells us that there is a corn shortage, and that is, instead of corn being shipped from across the U.S. to the southern ports to go overseas, corn was going from east to west, or west to east, which means that the east was buying corn from the west. You didn't have the abundance of corn that you would normally have to even have the exports going out the door. And I know a lot of grain farmers are kind of puzzled by this, going, well, wait a second, I'm not getting more money for my grains. Of course not when there's a grain shortage. So they're going to try and control the price, and they're going to try and move it to where they want to get it moved to. You don't know any of that because you take it to an elevator and you take the money that they give you for it, and they say, well, this is the market rate. They artificially inflate the numbers of corn to keep the market rate low, and it's just been a bad situation for the last couple years.
As we know, farmers are incredibly tough people, but these are such tough times. The annual meeting of the American Corn Growers Association included a seminar on suicide prevention this year. And on top of all this stress comes this new sweeping science that looks at the land, the state of the land around the world, and says things are only going to get worse.
But we have seen a decrease in corn. We've seen a decrease in wheat. We've just planted the lowest wheat crop in 100 years this past year. And I did a video on wheat earlier this year. I was expecting wheat prices to go up 40% this year. I still expect them to go way up this year, possibly more than 40%. You've got a big challenge with wheat right now. Russia, in my last video, had cut back exports to 20 million tons. Now they're talking about cutting them back to 7 million tons. In that video, I warned about watching for the second cutback of Russia on wheat.
To guarantee food security, Kazakhstan stopped exporting wheat flour. Kazakhstan is one of the world's biggest shippers of wheat flour. Now, Kazakhstan banning the export of wheat flour could change the price of pasta in Italy. More so, historically, bread shortages have caused economic and political upheaval of all sorts.
As a consumer, you're not going to find flour in the store. I posted on our community page a way that you can take the wheat fruits and turn them into flour yourself or other whole grains. You might be able to still find those. Check the video below. I'm going to be posting some links to different ways that you can become self-sufficient, and I'll do one on flour and I'll try and find some whole grains for you. But you can create flour from whole grains. You can create yeast by mixing some flour with water, leaving it out on your counter and allowing it to ferment and take in the natural bacteria from around it. That's what creates the yeast. You can create a living yeast, and you can grow you can basically grow your own yeast and then create your own bread. But the point of this is that grains are suffering. We're starting to see countries around the world curve their exports, and then they're also trying to import more. That's a sign that countries are hoarding these staple products, and that's a very scary sign.
As the coronavirus sends the whole world into a virtual lockdown, reports indicate countries are beginning to hoard food in large quantities. Major exporters of wheat, rice and what have you are said to be stockpiling, which has serious implications for global trade and food security in parts of the world. Kazakhstan, which is a major exporter of wheat flour, is said to have banned exports. Countries like China are also said to be adding to their reserves with rapidity. The implications for prices and availability could be huge.
It's not going to consumers. Okay, it's not going to consumers. If you don't have it, if you've noticed, the store shelves aren't refilling. This isn't something that we have an oversupply of, and as soon as the store shelves were empty, within a week they were refilled again. It's been weeks and they haven't been refilled. This isn't a transportation issue because the DHS and the Trump administration have pretty much made all of those essential businesses. They can still transport food. They can still transport things to get there if they have it, but they don't have it. And that's the big issue that's out there right now. We don't have seeds because all of our crops last year had to go towards production. Not enough was held back for seeds. There is a massive seed shortage. We saw the potato seed shortage that hit the news last year. A lot of our other crops that are normally held back for seeds just weren't. And you've heard this from seed companies. You hear the government saying we have plenty of seeds, and then the seed companies are going out and telling farmers, you order your seeds now or you don't have them because we're in low supply, and competitor X and competitor Z, they're almost out. And that's the reality of where we are this year. A lot of our crops last year did not go to the normal uses to ensure a high, a nice seed supply for this year. They didn't, it's a problem. It's a big problem. So crop yields were high, but the acreage planted was much lower. And again, crop yields weren't anything to blow out of the water. They weren't as high as the year before. With the growing population, growing use of ethanol, growing use of, plant-based foods. People don't realize that plant-based foods require much more energy to produce and much more food to produce than our traditional diets. Nonetheless, it's actually not healthy without having the synthetic micronutrients, which dietitians and kind of bipartisanly in Congress, they've ruled that these synthetic foods and things need to be labeled as imitation, because when you're taking an imitation micronutrient, it's not impacting your body the same. The important thing with those that are focused on plant-based diets that you have to consider are the micronutrients other than proteins that are essential to human beings. They call meat mind food. That's because it has micronutrients in it, like choline, that help your brain develop. So for young people, it's especially important. For older people that have developed minds, it's probably less important. But one of the most common side effects of not eating meat is depression. So it does affect mental stability. That's all. All of the stuff I'm saying are proven in studies, and even the well-known vegetarian associations suggest having a diet that includes some sort of animal protein, whether it's milk or eggs or something to help your body get some of those micronutrients. But on just an overall production standpoint, to be able to extract what we need from plants to replace some of those other things requires an incredible amount of resources, more resources than we're able to grow. And it's probably, again, put a damper on some of those staple goods. You've got a lot of stuff going into labs and being turned into synthetics that just isn't normal. Right now, we're in a solar minimum period that is very similar to the early 1900s, and we're seeing similar impacts. We're seeing high rodent infestations. We're seeing pandemics. We're seeing crop losses due to extreme weather. This year, we're expecting 18 named storms in the Atlantic. That's a lot higher than the 12 that we normally get. It's a 50% increase, which I think could have a heavy impact on crops across the southern states. We're seeing all of these similar patterns to the early 1900s. Now, there have been a lot of scientists, and I know it's mixed information, and I know people go back and forth on this, but a lot of scientists, including many at NASA, believe that we're going into a grand solar minimum, in which case that the impacts of these things, the occurrence of these things, will continue to exacerbate. If that happens, you can expect to see more crop losses. It's a larger challenge getting food, and that'll continue for quite some time. They're expecting almost 30 years. So, my kids are going to grow up in a completely different environment where food is much less abundant than it was while I was growing up. And as we know, when food supply runs out and teeth start grinding, it changes the social dynamics globally. And I think that we're starting to see that. We're starting to see a shift in geopolitics, a much more combative way of handling things. And, the environment out there when it comes to geopolitics is not that great. As we've all been kind of sitting under our umbrellas in our self-quarantines, the world is changing. We're now pushing forward on operations in Iraq. There's just a lot of different things that have been going on globally as the environment changes, these crises pick up. Yes, there was an immediate food shortage because of the current situation, but this happened before this situation occurred. The draining of supplies from people trying to step up and get a couple months worth of food just kind of made the situation worse. If you think about it, the current situation with the pandemic. When a bunch of people go to the hospital all at once, all the supplies run out. They probably didn't have enough supplies to make it through anyway, but because everybody goes at once, it just makes the problem even worse, and then they can't handle the situation. Well, the same thing happens with food. When you're having a food shortage, people are going to the grocery store periodically and getting their normal amount of groceries. For the most part, you're able to play it off. You're able to maintain to a certain level without notice. But once a pandemic or something hits and those grocery store shelves get cleared and they don't restock the shelves, they can't restock all the store shelves across the U.S. the way that they were, several weeks ago, where they just had to stock little bits here and there. Now they've got to restock entire shelves. Now you start to realize, oh, wait a second, there's nothing else coming in. It's not there. There's a shortage. And that is the only thing that has changed with the pandemic. The food shortage started much longer before any of this. Started seeing fruit companies pulling out of the northern hemisphere and moving to the southern hemisphere. The growing conditions are changing. They're not getting the yields that they needed to get. We had problems with a lot of fruit growers last year. This is something that impacts vegetables, everything under the sun, literally, is impacted when the sun goes into a minimum period. It's interesting because, one of the things that plants need for healthy growth and survival, other than, moisture and warmth, is, to go through photosynthesis. And what we've seen from reading solar panel reports, and these are from solar farms across the U.S., is that as we went into solar minimum last year, we saw a 10% decrease in photocells for solar panels, which means that the plants are also seeing a decrease in their ability to photosynthesize. And so that is another impact that we're facing, and another impact that's going to put some strain on our ability to continue to grow crops. I don't think anybody ever thought that we'd be able to just continue to increase yields forever. I mean, that's, if you think about it, it's kind of an impossible thought in the first place. So we're going through a correction, a natural correction in cycles that is going to be impactful on everything that we eat, everything that we put in our cars, every clothing item that we buy. And the current situation has just taken a magnifying glass and shown it to the world. The problem is that you're out of time to prepare. If you're not prepared already, you're kind of facing a little bit of hardship. My suggestion would be to immediately start making preparations to be self-sufficient. Right now is the time to be starting your gardens. I'll put some links below on how to start some raised bed gardens. Super easy to do, and you would be surprised at how much food you can grow yourself. You can start chickens. You hear Maverick over here. We have 15 chickens and 18 chicks. We're getting up close to 20. We produce a lot of eggs every single day. Our family eats a lot of eggs. We put eggs in everything. You use eggs for baking. We cook eggs for breakfast. Sometimes we cook eggs for dinner for, we don't want to take the time to prep something else. But eggs are a great source of protein, and again, as the birds age and they're no longer producers of eggs, you have another meal. So it's kind of chickens, backyard chickens are one of the easiest ways to become self-sufficient. So in the links below my video, I'm gonna kind of categorize some different options for you on becoming self-sufficient. Obviously, when it comes to meat, hunting is a great source of protein. Now, the thing is that you still need to abide by your hunting laws. The government's not completely asleep. But there is small game, and there's, large game during the right seasons that you can stock up in a freezer. I also would highly suggest you start some chickens. Chickens are extremely easy to take care of. You can get a whole entire setup, have chickens in your yard tomorrow. Within a couple months, you'll be having eggs coming out your ears. On a day where they're all laying, it's pretty busy around here with eggs. But then, as they get older, you can also process the chicken when they stop producing eggs for you. So they're multi-purpose, and they're great to have. They fertilize your yard. They help clean out bugs. I mean, to me, they're essential. I love having them on our property. Ice Age Farmer posted a video on raising rabbits, and I think that raising rabbits is a good idea. We don't have to raise them because they're all over the place here. And like I said, I think the rodent population, and rabbits are a type of rodent, will continue to increase. And so I'm not really concerned about raising them. We have a lot of wild rabbit. They're not going to be as big and fatty as the ones you raise in a cage, but if we get to that point, we like rabbit. We eat rabbit. We like going to wild game places and trying different things, so we know what meats we do like and which ones we don't like. Raising rabbits is another easy way to raise some sort of livestock in a confined area. I know that a lot of you don't have the acreage that some of us have, and so that's just another great way, and I'll post a link to his video down below. I'll try and look it up for you. Raised bed gardens, super easy to do, super easy to maintain. Everybody should have a raised bed garden. I've posted some things on greenhouses. I would go ahead and get your greenhouses set up this year so that you are ready to go if we do have an early winter. I'm thinking that we will, and so those greenhouses will be extremely important to you to be able to produce and maintain throughout the wintertime. Another thing that we do for kind of long-term planning is we plant a lot of fruit trees. My son and I planted 2 almond trees this year, which are doing pretty well. And I think we should be expecting our first apples this year. So we've got a lot of different things going on our top 6 acres to make us more self-sufficient. Fishing's a great way to find some protein, and I'm sure everybody has a lake or something nearby. But I'm gonna put together some ideas below and give you guys some ideas of what you can do to produce flour from grains. I posted on our community board the other day. But all of these ideas are things that you need to start implementing now, because this situation is not going to get better. If you look at the global meat supply, it is shockingly low. A lot of that has to do with China. China, got rid of a lot of hogs last year. They got rid of a lot of chickens. Because of the current situation, they removed even more livestock because they couldn't get feed to the livestock. Australia culled a lot of cows last year because of droughts. The dairy industry has been culling cattle. There's been a massive, in my opinion, a massive herd reduction globally in cattle over the past year. I think it's going to, when these numbers finally hit and people start seeing the shelves cleared, I can tell you this, the meat departments, when I go into the stores, have been much lower. Those and, the staple items, fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, nobody's touching for whatever reason. I gobble them up. I drink several glasses of lemon juice a day, so y'all can leave your lemons for me. These things are things that you need to be prepared for now. They're not going away at the end of this thing. Even if the supplies were there, it would take months, if not a year, to fully recover to the state that we were in before. And I don't think that I don't think we have the supplies for it. I think that, this year, this growing season could potentially see in many crops a significant drop from last year. And especially if we do hit an early winter, which I'm expecting us to, based on historical records. Now, the problem with weather is that it always changes. And so you can look at history and say, okay, we have a 70 to 80% chance of X, Y, and Z happening, but there's still a 30 to 40% chance something completely off the wall happens because, ocean temperatures change. Last year, for example, we were expecting a higher hurricane season, but the Atlantic was cooler than normal, which actually reduced the number of storms, thank God, because some of the storms that did show up were huge, but they stayed out to sea. This year, we've had that strong Arctic oscillation. The Atlantic could end up being a little warmer this year, but we're still dealing with, jet stream disturbances and things like that are creating an unstable environment globally for weather, which could increase those storms. So I think the forecast of 18 named storms is probably right on, and they could be pretty powerful storms. The world is changing, and it's going through a cycle change that we can't do anything about as people. The only thing that we can do about it is not get caught in the crosshairs. And the only way that you can't get caught in the crosshairs is to make yourself reliable on yourself. If you have everything that you need, you don't need to worry about the rest. You don't have to worry about whether or not the government's going to be sending you a stimulus check. If you have everything you need, you'll be taken care of. And that's the main message that I've been trying to get across on our channel. And yes, it sounds like a doomsday sometimes when you talk about activity in our environment, but this isn't anything that the world hasn't seen before. There are a lot of preachers and people out there these days that are calling for the end of the world because, of things that they've read in the Bible. But here's the thing, is number one, it's very clear in the Bible that nobody's going to be able to tell that time. These events happen over and over again in the Bible. The Bible provides us numerous case studies of this exact same thing and how people made it through it. Joseph, Moses, Noah, those are all examples of periods of change where these people were led to make better decisions, and they were led to make decisions that got them through those periods of time. It's not the end of the world, it's just the beginning of another. So yes, stock up, buy some of the items that you see out there that are available, but more importantly, more than just stocking up, you need to start investing into your own infrastructure for sustainability. If you don't do it now, in a few months, when things start drying up online, you're not going to be happy with yourself. You're going to be hitting yourself over the head going, why didn't I buy that raised bed and start a garden? Why didn't I buy that chicken coop and throw some chickens out there? Because there's nothing worse than being hungry. Again, like I've been telling you, these things have been going on for some time. All of these things that we're facing, all of these challenges, are challenges that are being created not from AGW. These challenges are being created from natural occurrences that occur in cycles. And if we're not paying attention, if we're not prepared, if we don't have the resources that we need to have to be able to maintain ourselves, the key word is maintain. I'm not talking about stocking up for a couple months. I'm talking about getting yourself in a position to maintain. If you're not in a position to maintain, then there is no control that you have over your future food supply. Believe me, when you have governments hoarding food supply, they're the ones that are in control of it. If you don't want to be eating rations that get cut back and cut back and cut back, and then, social disorder from governments having to choose who can get their hands on the food and who can't, then you need to maintain yourself. You need to have that ability. You have to have a system in place to maintain. When I think of people hoarding food from the grocery store and not bothering to go out and start learning how to grow their own food, it reminds me of a passage in the Bible in Matthew 25 when Jesus is talking about, those who grab their lanterns and the wise ones grab their lanterns in an extra oil vessel. Your preparation, your maintenance is your extra oil vessel.